And I think it's probably wise for us to ground this conversation of people who aren't familiar with you and your lifetime of work in a bit of background about your time in the space of activism and the time that you've spent in an ashram, and really how your whole life is this gesture of integration between the outer work of activism and social justice and the inner work of spiritual transformation, which is, such a key piece of this.
Yeah, I've had it's funny. I'm getting old now, I guess. So I guess I've got a story now. But when I was 6, my folks moved to this place called the York Center Community Co-op in just west of Chicago, where a group of people in the Church of the Brethren, one of the peace churches, invited people of other races and religions to live together with them as a witness for peace and brotherhood. So I ended up growing up during the Vietnam War years as a kid who was just kind of intellectually curious and read the news and wanted to talk about what was happening with all these adults, my friends' parents and my parents' friends around, who were Japanese who'd been interned and pacifists who wouldn't fight in the war, and just politically active people, leaders of the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up getting mentored to be a revolutionary, mentored to be an activist. And when I was in college, leading demonstrations and being very deeply involved in all that stuff in the early 70s, I realized that I needed to actually be able to live at an entirely superior principle. So I gravitated to the human potential movement, and from that I found my way to the ashram of my teacher, and I spent the first half of my adult life in intensive spiritual practice. So I've kind of gone from the outer work to the inner work, and now in a way I'm coming back. So my sense is that an integration is necessary. We're all faced with the fact that our current way of life is going to have to go through major changes, partly because of technological and economic transitions that are going to make our current patterns of living no longer necessary in many ways, because we'll have a lot of new possibilities and wealth, but also because of extreme weather events and disasters and the unsustainability of our way of life. And so we're living in this crazy moment, kind of poised between utopia and dystopia. And in this moment, it's very important that from a big picture, it's important that the best in human beings come forward in order that us future fossils not become fossils too fast here, and that those who might find our fossils might show up in just a few hundred or so years rather than in millions, so we don't have to re-evolve from the raccoons or something.
Many of my friends who are well informed about our ecological predicament talk with me about our situation as if the human species went wrong. And yet, from my spiritual education, I know that what is, by definition, cannot be a problem. What is can hurt, what is can be painful, what is can have within it, terrible imbalance. But it isn't a problem. There is something about what is happening right now that our souls chose. We're here alive right now. This is our life. This day is what we are given, and it is beautiful. And we can find our way into a relationship to this as a sacred opportunity. yeah, in some sense, human civilization is in trouble as never before. And yet, in some sense, the beauty and wonder of life is present to us. And we know enough to awaken to and open to and deepen into and savor that deliciousness as we never knew before. So somehow this is not a problem. This has to be the opportunity of our lives. So I have plunged as deeply into this as I know how, and I've delivered the insights that have been most meaningful to me, to my reader of this book, A New Republic of the Heart. And I hope on that basis you'll be coming together with me and others for a series of cultural conversations by which we will be the health and wholeness of the human system reasserting itself in the midst of a time of fragmentation. In a time of incoherence and fragmentation, there is nothing more insurrectionary, nothing more irreverent, nothing more revolutionary than to enact wholeness. Many of us are already doing this, and we are going to do it in new ways with more coherence than ever before.
I, I think I should have done this right from the start, but why don't you give us a kind of a thumbnail sketch of the book, what the book is about,
Okay.
what its goal is, what people will accomplish by reading it.
Well, yeah. The book begins with a chapter called Our Wicked Predicament and the Consensus Trance, in which I really face people with particularly our ecological predicament and how that's interwoven with our political, our social, our psychological, even spiritual predicaments. Right now, we've been in the mode of a growing economy and a certain kind of psychology and our understanding of a meaningful and successful human life that depend on unlimited resources, because we've had them with fossil fuels and going back 500 years, even to the discovery of the New World. There's always been unlimited new resources, and we're no longer in that position. And so we're in this rude awakening moment. It's a tipping point. And I help people understand that this is a moment in which the future will be radically, radically different from the past and the present. And yet that it asks of us both waking up to the fact that we've got to think outside the box, we've got to live outside the box. But it also, I make this point in a kind of memorable line, things are far too serious for us to lose our sense of humor. That in a way, our way of relating to all this has to bring out the best in us. And that means that our gratitude and our joy and our recognition of the amazing gift of life and of this moment have to animate us, because the circumstances require our very best, and those are the resources that bring out our best. So I then kind of go back and forth between the two streams that have animated culture since the 60s of what we call progressive culture, activism and awakening, that there's two communities in a way. And so I recently wrote an article for Alternet that hopefully we'll be putting onto op-ed news called, it's about awakening and being woke. I'm basically saying that those who are woke need to awaken, and that the communities of awakening need to get woke. That there is a new potential alliance between activists and spiritual practitioners that can be a social force. And a certain part of my work has to do with mobilizing spiritual practitioners, or what even atheists who are interested in higher consciousness in very rational terms, to stop just focusing on the inner work and to integrate the inner work and the outer work. Although it's a vice versa thing. Activists need to be a presence of a higher consciousness to be effective.
What does that mean?
A presence of a higher consciousness?
What is it? You just said activists need a presence of a higher consciousness to be effective. Now, you have spent most of your time in recent decades doing a lot of inner work. And I've been more on the outer work, looking at politics and activism and whistleblowing and things like that. So I really am excited by the idea of the two intersecting. So what does that mean?
That we could spend our whole hour on that. That's a very, very rich exploration. What I, I don't have my elevator speech handy, but I'll just launch into it. Activists are always tending to, because we have to face all the challenges to meaningful and sustainable systemic change, because an activist understands the systemic roots, not just of injustice and unsustainability, but of virtually every ill. And so the enormity of what we have to change is vivid to the activist, and the urgency of being effective is vivid. And part of our own personal well-being ends up being linked in to the larger causes that we've decided to devote ourselves to making a difference in. And unfortunately, our experience has been, whatever, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back in the Trump era. And the potential for burnout, activists are always talking about burnout and depression and disheartening experience. A lot of activists are on antidepressants or self-medicating with, whatever, pot or alcohol or whatever. It is hard to be an activist. We take on an extra burden. Not only do we have to compete in the marketplace just to make a living and make our lives work, we also have to take on a larger intention and not always meet with success. And our communities of fellow activists together, give us a kind of solidarity and friendship of a certain kind. At least we are in many ways on the right side of history. But we have to find a resource for an energy and it's a resource that kind of fills our tank and gives us access to unreasonable happiness, gives us access to a basis for a kind of gratitude for every ordinary moment of life, the kinds of things that you get from certain kinds of spiritual awakening. And it also is the case that we're only as effective as activists as we are as communicators. There are a lot of tasks that we do behind the scenes, but often we're writing something or we're communicating, verbally or whatever. And what comes across has to be essentially attractive. It not only has to be attractive, it has to be filled with an energy that compels others. If we're inspiring, we have to come from a place that is by itself compelling. And this larger energy and consciousness that we can contact through serious practice, dedicated, consistent life of practice. My earlier book, Integral Life Practice, that I wrote with Ken Wilber, is an integration of not just meditation and explicitly spiritual kinds of practices, but practices to sharpen our minds, practices just, the ordinary things of diet, exercise, and sleep that make us healthy. That there has to be a cultivation of the whole being in order to really accomplish the tasks of the path. I don't view it as just being spiritual. But ultimately, we end up having to be a presence of love and a presence of patience. We have to have compassion for ourselves and each other and even our enemies. We have to become almost saintly. What we're being asked for in this time, this is a transformational moment, is to become heroes of a whole new kind. And that means bringing our very best. And the science of being our very best is not just 20th century science. There's an ancient science of cultivation of wisdom and being a presence of wisdom and compassion and meditative awakening and so forth that have some relevance. It's just that they're not complete. Everywhere you turn, you're going to find really real and valuable answers to aspects of the questions that we're facing. But we're in a moment in which it's like a singularity. What's demanded of us is like a 360-degree growth into a new maturity. And it requires all that inner work in order for the outer work to be maximally effective. And I think if we take that personally and we also take it into our relationships with each other, that's where things really can change. But the kind of conversation that I'm inviting people to is actually one that is not only about what we know and communicating what we know, it's about being in an inquiry and really being interested in what we don't know yet. And also listening. Like I notice that, you know, in the time pressure of trying to make this a rich discussion, I'm thinking of points I want to make and so forth. But the kind of conversation that we're going to start having to have as human beings is one in which we lay out some of the things that we do know, but then we get into a place of deep listening such that what the other person says actually changes us. And we respond then with new ideas that maybe that we've never even thought before. And that we actually make inroads into that unknown, that terra incognito, that we, where together we go into this territory, because the human race does not have adequate answers to the questions that we are facing as a survival matter right now. And so our ability to stay in the questions and stay in the pressure of those questions, like a Zen koan, an impossible riddle, we're faced with impossible riddles. How can we grow to this next stage of our own evolution? How can we be friends at a different level? How can we have conversations that change us and that have us together discovering new ways of being human? We're up against a lot. And that opportunity to be changed and to find our way into a kind of joyous, radiant, you know, all the best qualities of ourselves that is still in touch with the grief and the horrors of the ways in which we've overshot our planet's carrying capacity and brought about the beginnings of the sixth extinction event in the history of the planet, and the fact that our own lifestyles, the electricity we're burning by powering our computers in order to have this dialogue, the gas we burn in our cars or in our, you know, if we take an airplane ride, the fact is our middle class lives are unsustainable. We have met the enemy and he is us. Guilt isn't the answer to that. Being with all of that at a deeper existential, emotional, human level in ourselves, and having that bring out what's best in us and having that draw us together in a disarmed, broken-hearted kind of a way, such that we let ourselves be penetrated and we bridge together into the territory in which, like a lightning rod attracting the crackle of electricity from the sky, we're attracting the strange attractor of new understandings and new insights and new ways of being human.